Hi friends, it's Casey. Welcome back to the Pocky Art Journal. We are exactly halfway through the journal now. This is the very middle spread. As you can see, it's pretty thick on the left side, and we have the whole right side to go, so it's going to be a hefty book by the time it's done. I've already gessoed my pages, and we're just going to put the little pieces of paper behind there to protect all the others. Sorry about that. I don't know why I kept knocking into the tripod this time. You'll probably see it several times. I just don't know what the deal is. The robot vacuum went through yesterday, and I think it moved it on me. So anyway, this is my color scheme for today. It's reds and dark purples, and then finishing with black. I'm not really loving the color palette. There's a lot of darks in it. I did have an idea of what I wanted to do to start out, so right now I'm just trying to choose paint colors that match as close as possible. I don't actually have a whole lot of reds, even though I have a lot of different kinds of paints. So I had to really search to get paints that I wanted. I've got 2 liquid fluid acrylics and 2 that are Liquitex Basics. And I do prefer the fluid acrylics because they just move better on the page. I don't do really any kind of impasto or anything where I'm creating texture with my paint. I just like it to be smooth and pliable. So I'm just mixing my red with a little bit of white because the red was just too red. And here it still was too red, so I'm mixing it with more white. This spread was really tough. From the get-go, I just wasn't liking how things were going. So this is a much better color. I am adding a little bit of water just to get it to move even more. I didn't really want the paint thick on the page. Unfortunately, it ended up being really thick on the page, but you'll see that later. Sometimes spreads work out and sometimes they don't. This spread is really all about just persisting. Persisting and improvising and just working with it until it gets to a point where it's decent. Now I had a basic idea of what I wanted to do before I started, and I got to that point and then I thought, I don't know where to go from here, so I just decided to try things. And sometimes when you try things, they don't work out. But that's okay. You keep going and eventually it gets there. I've been doing art for a very long time, but I definitely am not perfect at it. Not even close. Which is kind of the cool thing about art. There's always something new to learn, always something fun to explore. I've got the lightest color in my color palette and the darkest color in my color palette. And now I'm going to kind of alternate them on each side so that it's not just one color here and one color there. This is going to combine the colors so that they work together cohesively. This is a pattern that I actually put on the wall of my art studio. We built our house several years ago, and when I painted my art studio, I knew I wanted to have a couple of different colors in it. Not really colors, it's white and gray, they're neutrals. But I wanted to have something fun and artsy and have a design on the wall. And I was also thinking about photographing artwork. So I wanted to have a section of wall that was white, and I wanted to have a section of wall that was gray, so that I could take pictures with different kinds of backgrounds. Because sometimes if you have too much white in a painting and you put it on a white wall and then try to photograph it, it's just a wash of white. So I wanted a gray, but then there are some paintings that would look better on a white background. So I had to ask myself, how did I want to do this with the walls? I could paint one wall white and one wall gray, or two walls white and two walls gray, whatever. And I didn't really want to do a whole wall, particularly because my husband takes half of my space. We haven't finished our basement yet, and that's where all of his stuff is supposed to go. But until then, he's taking half my studio. So this is what I came up with. And I did the white and the gray, and then I did this kind of design. And it turned out really neat. And I just freehanded it. Honestly, I had very little time to do it. It was the last room that I did when we painted the house. When I say when we painted the house, it's actually when I painted the house. I did 95% of the painting. And by this point, my husband was really tired of being here, wanted to leave. And so I just had to go as fast as I could, but it still turned out all right. I'm just putting little curlicue shapes and leaf shapes, and then these little three-pronged kind of like a, I don't even know what to call them. Kind of like in a deck of cards where you see the clubs. That's kind of what it is. And then dots on each side. So that's my basic design. I got to this point and then thought, I don't really know what I'm going to do next. But I had already gotten the paints out, so I thought I'd better do something with these paints. I went through all the trouble of choosing the colors. So I got out my dotting tools and decided to put some dots in. I have dotting tools. I originally got them to make like dotted mandalas with, but I really just don't have the patience to do those, I guess. They're really neat. I like them a lot. I don't know what it is. Maybe I just don't have enough creativity to do different things with the dots. I don't know. I do use the dotting tools in my journal sometimes, but I don't actually make mandalas with them. If you're one of those people who does, my hat's off to you. They are very cool. I've got two different colors and I'm using different sizes of dots. At this point, it's fine. I don't hate it. I just am not really sure what I'm going to do with it after this. I decided to get out some scrapbooking paper. And I want to make some lines on the other side from the design. And I kind of want them going horizontally because I've got the design going vertically. So that was the thought process behind this. It actually was pretty hard to find colors for this color palette. This one has some blue in there, and I do end up with some blue spots in this spread, even though blue isn't in the color palette. It just happened to be in the paper, and so I just went with it. So that's kind of the plum color that's on the card there. So I decided to go with the plum. And I wanted one more, so ultimately I went with a red. I don't know what it is about reds. Maybe it's just these cards, but I cannot find reds that actually match. Not that they need to match, but the card reds tend to be duller or lighter, and the scrapbooking paper tends to be like bright red. And I know for sure my acrylic markers are all bright red. So I really do not like this. It's too symmetrical and not interesting. So having more weight at the bottom of the page I thought looked better. Unfortunately, I sort of painted myself into a corner with this because it was hard to think of something to do next. Sometimes that happens, but there's always a way to get out. It forces you to be creative, that's for sure. See, at this point, I could have put more dots over top of the scrapbook paper and then maybe put some circles, but that's not what I did. And honestly, I'm not sure that would have even been better anyway. I decided to copy the leaf shapes. I didn't want to fill them in because I didn't want them to be too heavy. So I just did the outlines. Now this kind of art is called intuitive when you don't really have a plan and you just do whatever you feel like doing, whatever comes to mind. Sometimes intuition works and sometimes it does not. There's always a risk when you do intuitive work. More often than not, that risk will pay off, but occasionally it doesn't. And to be honest, it's like that with planned work too. Sometimes you plan a piece and you execute it and it just does not look like it did in your head. See, this I totally hated. I spent a while trying to figure out what to do. I thought I needed to pull some of the scrapbook paper over to the other page because they really just look like two separate works right now. And there's, see, I keep knocking the tripod. I don't know what the deal is with that today. So I did like putting the scrapbook paper on the right side of the spread, but I still could not stand either the dots or the black outlines of the leaves. So I decided I was going to take my baby wipe and some paint and go over them and try to get them to fade into the background a little bit, not be so heavy. Unfortunately, that meant going over some of that scrapbook paper. But it did help to kind of incorporate it into the background rather than have it just floating on the top. I thought that might be good enough to just have it fade into the background more with those dark outlines. And here I took, this is supposed to be a dark red marker. It's never as dark red as I think it's going to be. It actually comes out more of a rusty brown color. And it was definitely not what I needed. So I ended up going back to my black marker. And I'm basically just copying the same thing that I did on the right side. I don't typically like everything going in one direction like that. It does help to have the scrapbook paper going horizontally. I really do think copying the design from the right onto the left really did a lot for this spread. It doesn't look like it now, but it will. One thing about art, it teaches you patience. It also teaches you persistence, because the key to good art is just not giving up on it. I can still see too much of the leaf outlines in the background, so I decide I'm just going to cover them completely. And here's the problem when you mix colors, and why I don't like mixing colors and I'd rather use colors straight from the bottle, is that it's really hard to mix the same tone twice. You can probably tell that it's a little pinker than the original color. It ended up being alright because I think going a little lighter helped cover the black from underneath a little better. And then I did add more red and remix. Finally got pretty much the same color I had the first time, and then went over it all again. That's the really cool thing about acrylic paint, is it covers just about everything. If you create something you don't like, you just paint right over it. This is absolutely not the first time I've done this, where I've created a spread and hated it and painted over it and tried again. And I'm just kind of blending it onto those pieces of scrapbook paper. Because I want the scrapbook paper to be there and be noticeable, but more to be part of the background. Now the hazards with trying to go around a design is that you inevitably end up going over some of the design, so I had to get my black marker back out and retrace those lines. And now we're finally starting to get somewhere. And I did get out a gardening catalog and decide to put some flowers in, just because I felt like it needed something to, first of all, kind of cover up some of the thick paint that I had just applied, and also to add a focal point. You of course could paint a flower on if you were so inclined. I've done flowers in watercolor on pieces of watercolor paper and cut those out. but in this case I'd already been working a couple of hours on this piece, and I didn't want to do my own drawings. I had already screwed up my drawings enough, so I went with the standby of just cutting out photographs. I do like using collage elements in my pieces. So now I'm going to take my Stabilo pencil and add some shadow, and this is going to make the flowers pop off the page. And make sure they don't just fade into the background. And you can see how effective that is. It just makes that flower pop right off the background. Now it's obvious that the flowers are the focal point. I'm adding my sentiment. I found the absolute perfect one. It says, "Change what ain't workin'." I couldn't have come up with a better one myself. Not only that, but it's that same blue color that I have in my scrapbook paper. Now, normally I would cut the words apart and kind of spread them around the page, but I really just liked having them all together like that. And instead of inking the edges, I just used my Posca marker. It was a lot faster and less messy. Now the paper is awfully white. I wanted it to not be quite so bright, so I took one of my gelatos and I just wanted to do kind of a wash of pink. And I started to apply it and it didn't smear the way I wanted it to, so I used some water. And then the water kind of made the paper a little transparent so you could see it through the background, and it got dark and it was a little panic-inducing, but once I dried it, it dried white again. And then I smeared just a little bit of pink on there. It's still pretty white, but not too bad. I think it blends better anyway. So here it is. It took a lot of work, but it's finally done. Let me know what you think. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.